Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Andrea Callanan, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of English here at Memorial. I'm also a program support with Memorial's Office of Public Engagement. Before we proceed, we acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, and the Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you're located and on the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. We're streaming today from the Amera Innovation Exchange at Signal Hill campus in St. John's, with our hosts and panelists in various locations across the province. We are recording this session to share on our website, our YouTube account, and through our e-newsletter, The Tandem. After we've heard from all our panelists this afternoon, we'll be opening the floor for some Q&A. And if you'd like to ask a question, please pop it in the chat box. And if you're not sure what pop it in the chat box means, if you look for a little speech balloon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you click that, a window will open up in the sidebar and you can type your question in there. You can type your question at any point during the session. I'll be monitoring the chat while the panelists are speaking, and I will hold on to your questions and pass them along when it's time. We'll also be using the chat feature to share information like presenter bios, any relevant links that come up, and a closing survey, which we would be most grateful if you would please fill out for us so we can make these sessions better and better. This discussion is intended as an open, respectful dialogue about public engagement at Memorial University, and we are here to listen, to learn, and to share. We ask that our panelists and our attendees try to keep the conversation broad enough to be interesting and accessible to everyone who's joined us today. And if you would like to discuss any very specific situations related to public engagement at Memorial, we're happy to chat one-on-one. You can email us at engagement@mun.ca, and I will pop that email in the chat box as well. We've got a really great panel here today, and we're looking forward to hearing all about their experiences with public engagement at Memorial over the past decade and about where they see us heading in the future. So to get things started, I'm going to introduce our host, Rob Greenwood. Rob is Memorial's Associate Vice President, Public Engagement and External Relations, and is the current and founding director of the Harris Center. Rob has led the development process for Memorial's public engagement framework over a span of 10 years and is a longtime practitioner and administrator of community university collaboration. And so with that, over to you, Rob Greenwood.
Thanks, Andrea, and welcome and thank you all for attending. We have a great group, broad range online today, including students, faculty, staff, alumni, public partners, and colleagues from other universities in the province, across the country, and around the world, actually. So it's a great cross-section of folks. In 2010, 2011, we began working on a university strategy for public engagement that would offer a pan-university vision, values, goals, objectives for Memorial's academic collaboration with the public. After many, many conversations, I think we had 1,000 people involved inside and outside the university. Some of them may have showed up more than once. During that process, the Public Engagement Framework was launched in 2012, 2013. It is Canada's first and still only, we think, University Senate endorsed strategy of its kind. So it's actually an approved academic governing document of the university. And it has formed the basis for a broad range of public engagement programming, centers, facilities, and projects since then. When we reached the end of the first phase of the framework in 2020, we knew it was time to start thinking about what would come next. But before we did that, we have always had a strong culture of evaluation in our unit, and we felt we needed to get a clear idea on how we did the first time around. And so we designed an evaluation process and asked big questions such as, did the framework meet its goals? What is the state of public engagement at Memorial? And how has public engagement at Memorial changed over the past decade? And what role did the framework play in that? As I say, hundreds of people inside and outside the university shared their thoughts in the development of the framework. They also did in the evaluation. giving us a clear look at public engagement over time, from the initiation to now. We'll discuss all of that today and also consider what comes next in our public engagement story. To begin, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and give a bit of context about their experience with public engagement at Memorial. And we'll start with our fearless leader in the Office of Public Engagement, Rebecca Coho.
Thanks, Rob. I come to Memorial University by way of a master's degree in Irish literature. I came to Newfoundland and Labrador from Ontario in the early 2000s. And I kind of found my place here. I knew that I wanted to stick around at Memorial. And after, being out of the university, doing some stints in some other industries, I made my way back and actually began working with Rob and the team at the Harris Center. I have a rural background, and I just found the approach to sort of the rural and regional economic development really appealing and really interesting, and also the linkages between the Harris Center's work and the close connections that it helps support between faculty and staff and communities across the province. Rob started his work on the public engagement framework, and I kind of just migrated over with him and eventually found my place in the Office of Public Engagement. These days, I'm the manager of public engagement here, and we operate a number of programs that support faculty and staff in deepening and furthering those connections with folks outside the university. So we have a funding program, a suite of funds that operate to support people from the very earliest stages of their programs or projects, all the way to larger amounts of money for developed projects and postdocs even these days. And a certain amount of education and training work as well. And I've also led, in partnership with our awesome team here, the evaluation. So I'm really excited to be able to chat about the results. This has been a big project that we've been working on for quite a while, and I'm really pleased to be able to share what we've learned.
Thanks, Rebecca. Next up is Peter.
Thank you, Rob. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Alexander Parker. I'm a program evaluation consultant, currently in Newfoundland Labrador Center for Health Information. But starting from next week, this becomes part of the Provincial Health Authority. There were a lot of legislative changes. I'm not currently affiliated with MUN, but MUN is Memorial University is close and dear to my heart. I'm a MUN alumni in 2018. I also I had my co-placement with the Public Engagement Office of Public Engagement. So that's where I met Rebecca and Rob and everybody else. I was also part of the formative evaluation team, and that was, I believe, 2017 or 2018. And that's where our roads parted, and I moved to health and evaluation of health. But since we had a need for summative evaluation, Rebecca reached out if I would be interested in sharing my expertise and my past experience, actually, just to provide the maximum benefit for everybody, just to conduct this proper evaluation. And that's how I ended up being here, and which I'm actually very happy about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter, and vice versa. And over to Jana.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jana Rosales, and I'm based in the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science at Memorial. I'm teaching over there the communication and ethics and professionalism courses for undergraduate engineering students. I've taught at MUN since 2009, and I actually originally came to public engagement through a teaching and learning lens. So I had this interest in what's called dialogue education, which was a model that, well, one of the models we picked up from Simon Fraser University had some significant public facing aspects to it that some colleagues and I were interested to explore here at Memorial. And I was contributing to the original teaching and learning framework as it was emerging in 2011. And my interest in transformative and experiential education connected me to early conversations that were happening about public engagement. And that was through the Office of Public Engagement's precursor, the Harris Center. And then in 2012, I became a member of the newly created expert working group for the public engagement framework. So I had no training in public engagement, just this raw interest in connecting the dots between experiences and approaches that might help make students' learning experiences more transformative and catalytic. And so through the expert working group, contributed to the public engagement framework from the very start. I wore a couple of public engagement hats over the years, helped form a working group on civic engagement and social innovation, served a few years on the Quick Start Grant Review Committee, was named the Engagement Fellow for the Signal Hill Living Learning Community, the graduate residents up there on Signal Hill campus, and also received some Quick Start funds and accelerator funds, mainly around my work to explore mindfulness in engineering, as well as technological literacy and engineering, the engineering profession as it engages with the public. And I didn't realize I would stick around as long as I have. It's been gratifying to see the profile of public engagement take hold at MUN. And I remember in November 2011, one of the earliest public engagement consultations, that Rob declared that he wanted to, this is a direct quote, spread the contagion of engagement. And so you might think twice about describing it that way now, but I'm really glad for the ways that public engagement has taken hold at MUN.
That's hilarious, Jen. I had forgotten those. I have a lot of cliches I use a lot. Haven't used that one for a while and probably shouldn't.
We all thought it was a little bit gross, so.
Yeah. On that note, last but not least, over to Rob Nolan.
Thanks. I hope it's not on the note of being gross, but hello, everyone. My name is Rob Nolan. I'm CEO at Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. I have many connections with public engagement at Memorial, not the least of which is my career up to becoming CEO a few months ago was at Memorial. So I spent 13 years working at MUN, and last going off with CIAP, Center for Institutional Analysis and Planning. I was involved with the evaluation of this framework. So I was saying before we started this panel, it's a nice bow to tie on my work with the framework to be involved internally and now to be involved externally. Through M&L Municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, we've had lots of involvement with Memorial over many years, and I'm already seeing it. This morning I had a meeting down at Gardner Center. Last week I met with Rob Greenwood, and I'd say we have daily interactions with Memorial in one way or another. So I'm excited to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Well, thank you, Rob. And so clearly, folks, we have an amazing range of experience on our panel and in our virtual room. And we know across all the many viewers or participants in this webcast. So to get us going now, we're going to ask Rebecca to share some of the context of what we mean when we talk about public engagement at Memorial, and to share some of the highlights of the evaluation. And that'll kind of set the table for the panel discussion and then the Q&A. Over to you, Rebecca.
Great. I am just sharing my presentation. One moment. Okay, folks, can everybody see that?
Good.
Great. Okay, so I am going to give some context into the sort of making of and what is public engagement at Memorial University. I know that many of you are literally sitting at Memorial University right now, so I will be quick, but I do think that there are some elements of our background and of our work that really do bear repeating in the context of PE. So for those of you who are not aware, we're a comprehensive university located in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. We've got about 18,000 students. We've got 6 campuses, including one in Harlow, UK, and our newest campus located in Labrador. We are in a province that has a small, dispersed rural population. We've got large landmass and a number of different sort of conditions and regions, including subarctic and Arctic, a huge amount of coastal landscape, and these sort of cultural and geographical and economic challenges and opportunities that come with that. Memorial University, we have in many ways been shaped by that place. We have specific areas of expertise related to oceans, and that would include science and technology, but then also on the society, humanities, social science side of things. And it's actually been estimated that over 40% of all of the research taking place at Memorial has some connection to that coastal Northern Arctic type of approach. Also known for rural and remote medicine, regional development, genetics is a strength. We have a thriving folklore program, and we also do certainly get noticed in some ways for our sort of focus on and connection to public engagement. And as you can see, most of the things that I've mentioned are somehow rooted in the idea of this place. We couldn't exist anywhere else. So this is really key to understanding why public engagement is such a crucial element of what we do here. Memorial University was founded as a living memorial to those who were lost in World War I and World War II. We also have the special obligation to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador that's built right into our institutional vision. Public engagement is right there in the academic mission statement, and that's right alongside research and teaching and learning. So those are the three pillars of Memorial's academic mission. We are the only university in this province. That means we've got an exceptionally close relationship with the provincial government, and also many of the areas of civil life that are governed through the province: medicine, education, deep connections to our ocean technology sector. There's also, and this is something that you often hear from folks who arrive in Newfoundland and Labrador from other universities, the fact that this province truly does have a sense of ownership over our university. And, you know, the public in this province rightly expect a lot from us. We are a research intensive university, and we've got an explicit public engagement mandate. So this is also an area of strength. We have a long history of that sort of place focus that I referred to, and many countless partnerships with Newfoundland and Labrador organizations and communities. We've also got very close connections and memberships within public engagement focused networks across Canada and across the world. These are certainly, this is certainly an area of global interest and of, you know, sort of differing approaches geographically. So it's really important and useful for us to be connecting in with the sort of different perspectives on how communities and universities can collaborate. As Rob mentioned, we're the only university in Canada that has a Senate-approved public engagement strategy. And Jana, you mentioned SFU. Last summer, we were working with Dr. Andrew Petter, who was the former president of SFU and was very much known for his commitment to public engagement. And he said, you know, SFU and Memorial, we were doing this before it was the thing. So the idea that on either side of the country, there were these sort of two institutions that were both really addressing that sort of idea of who we are in our places, and the two ways that we've become look very different, and they need to, because it's so rooted in the place and in the specific needs of the communities and the provinces that we serve. The public engagement framework most recently was recognized by the OECD. We've actually been included as a case study in OECD reports in Europe as a best practice in university community collaboration. So for us, it basically all comes down to the framework. The OPE is the steward of the public engagement framework. Rob gave you a pretty good overview of sort of how we came here, how we got here. And the public engagement framework is really the result. As Rob noted, it contains specific goals. It's got vision and values that were all developed collaboratively with committees and with groups and contributions from both inside Memorial and outside. And then there are specific objectives as well that we work towards. One of the really important things to stress when it comes to our framework is our definition. And public engagement can be kind of a slippery term. There are a lot of other things that it kind of sounds like, and there are a lot of other ways of describing parts of that work. So, you know, I've got another presentation with a massive word cloud with about 50,000 different words on it. I won't force you to take a look at that, but you know, things like public relations and community relations are an important aspect of what happens at a university. But is that public engagement? Stuff like experiential learning, where does that fit? So we needed to kind of find a way to define what we were talking about when it came to public engagement at our university. So where we've come to, and I will read this aloud because it is just so important to what we do. Collaborations between people and groups within Memorial and people and groups external to Memorial, the public, that further Memorial's mission. So that's that academic mission. Drawing on the knowledge and resources brought by all involved, public engagement involves mutual respect, mutual contributions, and mutual benefits for all participants. So the two factors that really, that are kind of the real crux of what we're doing here is that connection to the academic mission. So research, teaching and learning, service, and then also that element of mutuality. That is kind of the end all be all when it comes to the way that we consider public engagement here. And this is just a little bit of a visual that kind of shows you public engagement can exist on its own, but in most cases, when we're talking PE, we're looking at overlaps, sometimes related to research, scholarship, creative activity, sometimes with that service element, and often with teaching and learning as well. So it really does make sense to consider public engagement in the context of linkages to other parts of what universities do. Okay, so as Rob noted, we have concluded the first phase of the public engagement framework. That was in 2020. We were in the midst of the pandemic and knew that we needed to figure something out, but weren't exactly sure what. We spent a little bit of time really figuring out what we needed to do to make the most of learnings from the past decade or so. And as Peter alluded to, we did have quite a strong history of evaluation and monitoring within the office. At our very outset, we had developed a logic model. Teresa McKenzie, who I think I saw on the list of folks who are here today, was the manager of public engagement at that time. And she took a really methodical approach to help it be very clear to us what we were trying to achieve and to set some parameters for understanding whether we had achieved it. So Peter was actually able to use that. He was able to use the framework. And then together we developed a concept for our sort of overall evaluation that could really take a look at the last decade. The group included the folks from OPE, so that's our team. And I do really want to mention that we worked with a number of exceptional students through the MAPS program, which is the Masters in Applied Psychological Sciences here at Memorial. We had folks through internships with political science, and we had wonderful support through the ISWEP program, which is the International Student Work Experience program. We also worked with Peter as our experienced evaluation professional. We integrated feedback from our expert working group, which Jana had mentioned. That is our community of practice. It includes half folks from Memorial and half public partners. And then we did pull together the Public Engagement Evaluation Committee, and this was a group that included students, staff, and faculty, along with public partners, all of whom had some sort of background related to evaluation and public engagement. So we did 3 major surveys, we did a number of key informant interviews, focus groups, and a large amount of secondary data collection. Okay, so now we're going to get to the meat of it. First impressions based on the results. The good news is that it does appear that public engagement is alive and well at Memorial, although we see very, very different experiences depending on where folks are residing, both inside and outside the university. I still think that we are seeing a general lack of understanding about what actually constitutes public engagement, the idea of that link to the mission, the focus on teaching and learning and research. We did hear that barriers exist. Staff, faculty, and public partners all were able to identify aspects of the way that this is working that really just aren't working. But the good news is that there were a lot that we noticed that do seem to be kind of low-hanging fruit, although there are some that are quite entrenched and will take quite a bit more time and effort to improve and fix. The big point that is the one that I feel best about The results show very clearly that Memorial faculty and staff do feel a really strong sense of commitment to helping Newfoundland and Labrador and also the world. So we had 600 completed surveys, and it was quite intriguing because we ended up having like almost an exact 50-50 split between staff and faculty. 85% of the faculty and staff that we surveyed indicated they believe that there is a high need for public engagement at Memorial. Only 5% disagreed with that. And when we asked about whether they would like to see more public engagement happening, 75% indicated yes, and only 2% disagreed. We had positive, but you know, I'd be happy to see this number being higher as well. We had fairly positive results in terms of whether people feel that Memorial is fulfilling its public engagement mission. I guess probably the optimistic approach to viewing this is that it does appear, you know, only about 20% didn't really have a take on this. So that means that a large percentage of our respondents are aware of that mission and are considering how we're doing within it. We did also look at the levels that are taking place, both in terms of research and public engagement. We found that, and this was faculty only, of course, they reported 37.4% of their research currently involving public engagement. They wanted to be doing more, though. We found that 46.3% was the level that they would like to see involved in public engagement. We saw very significant differences between faculties and departments. And I think I will stick in now. All of the results are available at our website. I'm going to be sharing a QR code at the end that will allow you to go direct to the results. Along with the full report and a highlights document, we do also have an interactive dashboard that will allow you to actually sort and filter based on search parameters that are interesting to you. So that's a way to take a look at how things are broken down between faculties, for example. But before you do that, I do want you to be cautious because, you know, some of the numbers reflect different things. There are some units where there is a high priority by leadership put on public engagement. So that could affect the numbers that you see. Some disciplines are inherently engaged. I think about like the social accountability elements of medical research, for example. So do remember that all of this research is coming from a different perspective. So you will expect to see some differentiation between units. All that to say, we did see a huge sort of disparity in terms of the numbers. The highest recorded level in any unit of percentage of research, including public engagement, was 91%, and the lowest was down at 18%. And we saw an even bigger gap when it came to, in terms of the amount of teaching and learning that involves public engagement versus what folks would like to be doing. So currently we had faculty reporting about just under 20% of their teaching and learning activities involving PE. And this could mean a lot of different things. And probably we can chat a little bit more about what that looks like when we get to the Q&A section. But this could be experiential learning, it could be co-ops. There's a whole range of different types of work that could include. So we had levels from 0% all the way up to 46%. Okay, and in terms of change, this was a key question that we were asking. 44% of faculty and staff do believe that the levels of PE have gone up since the framework was adopted. And when you remove the folks who said they weren't sure, which was quite a large number, because you would have had to be here that whole 10 years to answer the question, it actually goes up to 75%. And we saw slightly lower levels with our key informants. 22% thought it was effective, but there's more to be done. 13% thought that the goals were overly ambitious, and 4% said the goals were too vague. Okay, so this is probably my favorite, most interesting result. Why do you engage? And the amazing thing was that for both faculty and staff, the top answer was the same, and it was to contribute to the community and the province. So we'll get into this more in the discussion, but I think it's really saying something that there was such an obvious sort of top motivating factor, and that it's such an intrinsic one as well. Okay, and I see that I'm already going over in time, so I'm going to kind of skip through some of the quotations. On the flip side, we asked, what is it that's keeping you from engagement? And no surprise, this is something that I think we talk about a lot in the university: time, lack of time. It was number one for both faculty and staff, but I also think that this is another one that we need to interrogate, because lack of time can mean other things as well. So we'll come back to that one. Okay, and how can we improve? This one there was a thunderous winner here among our faculty respondents. The recognition and promotion, the recognition within the promotion and tenure process was the clear winner when it came to the faculty respondents. We also see that people are looking for more funding opportunities, more resources and supports. And I think that comes back to that time question, increased awareness. That's something we should be able to work on. And also having public engagement being included in work and course load, which would be a big change, but it seems to be something that is of interest to folks. And the final one there, expanding our PE focus. We really have had a clear focus on our province and on Newfoundland and Labrador in the past. It may be that we want to consider expanding that focus to some degree. Okay, we also did a public partner survey, and we had about 130 people fill it out. Most of them have quite regular interactions with the university. 29% said at least once a month. So this is a pretty in the know group. 83% believe that Memorial is helping to make a positive difference in Newfoundland and Labrador. And when we asked about changes, we also saw a positive increase in terms of how people are viewing the work that's happening now versus the work that was happening then. So we do see an increase in both the amount of work that's happening, but also the value that Memorial is placing on public partners. Okay, and in general, when we gave specific areas of public engagement, we had great results. Most respondents do believe that Memorial is making its expertise and knowledge available to the public, that we're recognizing community expertise, and that it's easy to engage with Memorial. There was one exception, and that relates to the use of Memorial's facilities, buildings, labs, equipment. There certainly was the sense that it's not made clear that this is a resource that's available within our communities and within our province. And I am going to highlight these ones. So we've got some positive responses, but we also see, this one here. I've engaged with MUN in several different ways. However, there have no doubt been missed opportunities. More promotion to raise awareness about opportunities would help. And I don't want to only highlight the negatives here, but another one that isn't on this slide, but that we did find, spoke to the fact that some of our processes aren't designed with the public in mind, and it also it often leads to challenges and to having to do the same work over and over again. Okay, so the good news is that most of the folks who answered this survey, despite mentioning some of the challenges, still say they're likely to engage in the future, over 80%. We also did a third survey. We sent it to public engagement professionals from institutions across Canada. So these are folks who understand this type of work and who are doing it in their own areas of Canada. When we asked about Memorial's level of public engagement and the amount of public engagement taking place, 91% said that the level is higher than other Canadian institutions, and 0 said less. And this was a smaller sample, but these were quite informed participants. We also asked Memorial staff and faculty, and we got very different results, which was one of the more interesting results to me. 53% weren't sure, which is fair, because if you haven't worked at another university, how would you know? 17% said we do more, 17% said the same, and 12% said less. So I think that's another disconnect that would be worth discussing later in the conversation. And this is all leading to the big question, which is what comes next? What are we going to do? What does the next decade of public engagement at Memorial look like? So we're using these results to help shape that. We're about to embark on the next phase of consulting for the public engagement framework. We will certainly be building on the strengths and some of these past successes that have been identified within our results. But we'll also be considering new opportunities and addressing some of the challenges that have been raised. And certainly there have been new focus areas that have arisen since the initiation of the framework. Things like expanding student PE opportunities, alignment with institutional documents, things like the United Nations SDGs as an interest, increased attention to public engagement outside NL. And honestly, it's kind of wide open in terms of where this goes. We'll be speaking to many people, and we'll be offering many opportunities for input. So we're kind of looking forward to seeing where this goes next. I'm going to end it there. This code will, if you just put your phone camera up to it, you will see a little link will pop up. If you click on the link, you can go directly to our results. We've got the full report, which I admit is like somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 pages. But if you're really into data and methodology, you'll enjoy it. We also have a full range of case studies there that could be of interest. We've also got a highlights report where we've summed up in about 8 to 10 pages, some of the highlights of what we've learned. And then, as I mentioned, we do have that interactive online dashboard where you can go and look at your own specific area of interest within the framework. So I will stop my sharing, and I've gone over. I'm sorry, Rob.
Thanks, Rebecca. I can't say I've never done that myself. And we have a lot to say, and we're proud of it. So good on you. But we do want to turn to the panel now. And Rebecca will participate in that as well, but not in the first question. Well, maybe you can play cleanup at the end if there's anything you want to jump in on. But maybe we'll lead off with Peter as the one who really was the expert overseeing the evaluation. But I'll come to each of you. What about the results stands out most to you? Were there any surprises? Peter first.
Well, I have to say my biggest surprise was how positive the results were. I mean, I'm naturally a very optimistic person, and I expect that's fairly positive. But some of the surveys, they returned results that really surprised me, especially the discrepancy between how people at MUN think what they're doing and how it compares to other universities and how it's being seen from the outside. So that was probably the most striking discrepancy that we've actually noticed. So, and in a way it's understandable, because if you only work at Memorial, how would you know how this compares like to what's being done at other universities, right? So it's understandable, but maybe not as big discrepancy as I would think. So yes, overall very positive. If you think about the fact that only like 4 or 5% of people said that the public engagement actually decreased, or like there was like no benefits from implementing a public engagement framework. That's like 1 in 9, 1 in 20, 1 in 25 people saying saying this stuff. Like overwhelmingly, it was like between 75 and 95% of people said we're talking about the benefits for the university, for the province, for the people. And so yeah, so that was my biggest surprise. But obviously, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that everything's done perfectly. There was like a lot of barriers and other things. But yes, that was my first impression when I actually browsed for like all of these results.
Right on. Thanks, Peter. Jana.
So for me as a faculty member, I think something that stood out was just to know that faculty think levels of public engagement are versus where they want them to be. And especially when it came to teaching and learning, that most faculty said that they'd like to do more. So that there's at least this perceived value to public engagement. So that was interesting for me to find out. It was reassuring. It was nice to hear that public partner perception was high. So there's this brand recognition for Memorial when it comes to public engagement. And I mean, I'm a Memorial alumni, but when I started working here is when all the conversations around public engagement really started to begin. So that was really formative for where I was going in my career. So it definitely laid its mark on me in ways that I'll talk about, in a little bit later in the session. And the other thing that I noticed is the need to align with other institutional frameworks and strategic plans. So for myself, from having worked on the very first teaching and learning framework, I definitely brought knowledge of that into the public engagement consultations when they were first happening. When the public engagement framework was completed, then it was time actually to go back and review the teaching and learning framework, and I was involved in some of that as well. So I tried to bring some of that perspective into that review. I'm just one person though. So, you know, it does take a whole institution to kind of have this bird's eye view of how the frameworks fit together. I'm also involved in the equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism strategic plan that's underway right now. And so my knowledge of all those frameworks are trying to translate, you know, in ways to find more alignment where possible. And so I think can really help to have people be familiar with the different frameworks that where the opportunities for crossover when it really comes to trying to align them.
Thanks, Jana. Rob, your thoughts on this one?
Thanks. I would echo the comments around the support for public engagement at Memorial. It was really clear that everyone, students, staff, faculty, public partners, saw benefit in Memorial's public engagement and also wanted more public engagement from the university. So to Jana's point, I think it was really important that we saw internal recognize the benefit and want more, and external recognize the benefit and want more. And that goes together really nicely with a pleasant surprise was the fact that PE professionals across Canada view Memorial as a leader in this area, and that was so strong. That was a really pleasant surprise. You know, perhaps not surprising that we're viewed as strong, but that we're viewed as such a leader, or Memorial's viewed as such a leader in this space, really lends credibility and credence to moving forward in this space.
Right on. Rebecca, anything anybody didn't say about surprises you'd want to add?
Well, I guess I would echo on some level. To me, the thing that really made me excited about the results was that sense that people really care about this. And, you know, the top motivating factor being wanting to make a difference. That really resonates with me personally, but it also is a dangerous, you know, the fact that people are intrinsically motivated is great, but it also leads to people doing the work despite not having X, Y, or Z. So it's actually, it's a positive, but it also has the potential to be a negative too. And I think that the idea that people are doing this despite circumstances working against them, that is sort of the number one thing that I think we need to be addressing here. It shows that the motivation is there, but we also need to ensure that the support is measuring up to that motivation.
Right on. I'm going to do a question for each of you in turn, and I'll let you jump in, others if you really want. But for Peter, as the evaluation expert, we all know it's notoriously difficult to measure this type of work. What are the benefits and the limitations of the approach that we took to this evaluation?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. So because the project, I mean, the evaluation is like notoriously difficult. If you think about the university per se, I mean, it's such a complex entity. We're talking about like thousands of people. We're talking about staff, faculty, we got students, and it's not even that. I mean, you got you got hundreds of units. I mean, and they're like spread geographically, and that's just one level. Then if you think about public engagement, really, you have to consider partners which are outside of the university, right? So if you think about evaluating like such an entity as the university with public engagement, so you're thinking about, you know, like thousands of people being involved within the university, but also you have to reach out outside. So that's, if you think about the complexity of this whole process of like data collection, that's a massive, very, you know, like ambitious project. If you're obviously thinking about collecting the data, which will enable you just to make some general statements about what's happening at the university. So from that perspective, and since you always work with limited resources and time, I mean, almost never sufficient, you have to make some choices, right? I mean, you have to prioritize certain questions or certain answers to certain questions that you want to know. And we had some of them which were absolutely critical, and we had to get answers to those questions. So things like, you know, was the framework implemented as planned? Was there any changes like public engagements? Were goals or like targets met from the framework? Were there like any other unintended consequences? And so we had like answers to these critical questions. And so that's one of the biggest benefit of actually what we've done, because we actually went quite wide, and we had to actually get perspectives from a vast number of people, and using a huge number of different data sources as well, right? So if you think about the university, and if you only go and if you just collect numbers, just some quantitative data, you're missing out so much in terms of like impact or understanding of what's happening. So you really have to combine like these two. So, like and that's what we did actually. We got enormous amount of actually responses. Like if you think about it, 600 responses like from the survey. So that was just one survey, right? The internal survey. But we also got like dozens of key informants interviews. Everybody speaking anonymously, so they could actually be truthful about what they thought about all these changes and the impacts. We had a number of case studies. We got a lot of focus groups. So we've collected vast amount of information, a vast amount of data, which enabled us actually just to answer those like critical questions that we actually set up at the beginning. But the problem with obviously narrowing the scope of evaluation and going so wide is that oftentimes you can't go very deep into some of the topics that you want to. So for example, like things like, obviously we'd like to know about like knowledge mobilization, or like there's like so many other topics that you're like, well, should we actually concentrate a little bit more about this? But obviously if you think about, this summative evaluation and providing answers to this critical question, you really have to say no to some of those like, interesting, but not critical actually to know. So that was one of the limitations of the evaluation. Obviously you wouldn't go everywhere. You wouldn't like search behind every rock. You just wanted to first get answers to these critical questions. And we did very convincingly, because of the richness of the data that we got. So we mix a lot of quantitative with qualitative data. We've got a lot of different people involved, and we also got what is really important. We not only got the internal perception of how public engagement changed, but we also got the external context to it for the first time. So we actually reach out to other universities. We also ask people within the province what they thought about their interactions and any changes that happened since 2010. And because of that, the final end product is actually, I'm actually very happy with what we've managed just to achieve as the final product, because there's quite comprehensive view of what happened since the 2010. And you can actually look at it at the level of the university, but you can also have some degree of, we have a dashboard, right? So you mentioned it, Rebecca, right? So if anybody wants to see, for example, how specific faculty or how specific like unit compares like to somebody else, you can actually get this information. So it's not only the breadth of information that we collected, but there is some depth as well. And you can actually differentiate between like those different outcomes for specific units or specific faculties. And obviously you can't directly compare them, but still we have this information right now, and we actually can compare some of it at least in time to formative evaluation. One of the final limitations, I'm probably talking way too much. One of the final limitations was that we didn't have information from before the implementation of the public engagement framework. And that's actually a serious limitation, but we did manage to actually circumvent this problem by asking questions differently and actually getting some perspectives from different angle as well. So overall, I'd say there's a lot of different benefits of strength of the method of the approach that we've taken. We were able to answer like a number of critical questions, but obviously it wasn't perfect because we had to narrow down some of the scope of these questions. So yeah, that's for me. I'm not going to take any more time.
No, fantastic, Peter. Thanks. And obviously lots to inform the development of the next strategy, and also to provide a basis for future evaluations. So we're in good shape going into the future. Jana, you really have been part of this from day one, and in the development of the framework, as well as doing it as a faculty member. What changes have you noticed over the course of the first phase of the framework?
So my disclaimers, I don't claim to be a public engagement superstar or poster child, and I'm in awe of my colleagues who are, and a number of whom are profiled in the evaluation report. But I was excited by the conversations that were happening in the early days. And that, as I said earlier, that coincided with my own early days of teaching at MUN. And I have a notebook here that spans the 8 years of involvement from the earliest convened conversations to the maturity of the framework right before the pandemic. I know in my notes recording early perceptions of university and community members, like so addressing questions like why engagement now, which is something that Rebecca had noted in her introduction. Our attempts to flesh out what public engagement was, where it could go, as well as balanced with the desire to manage expectations about something that seemed rather nebulous to a lot of people at the start of it. And in one early meeting, someone described it as career suicide to get involved in community engagement under those conditions in 2011. But judging from the evaluation report, that's not the case now, thankfully. So the perceptions and the supports and the resources have definitely changed for the better. But in terms of the question of does the development of the public engagement framework and public engagement generally, does it align with my experience? Personally, I've always found it interesting to identify the synergies across different disciplines and contexts. So public engagement appeals to big picture thinkers like me who like to connect the dots over landscapes that might seem really different from each other. So public engagement helps to see connections that you might not see otherwise. It helps to bridge gaps with funding for things that don't fit neatly anywhere else. And I think that in itself is a really important role to encourage exploratory work to just try stuff out. And so the Harris Center and now the Office of Public Engagement and still the Harris Center have been really great at brokering relationships and knowledge mobilization. And I think that the mentors and the champions who've emerged over these years have done important things for the visibility of the scholarship and for the good of the community. Now there's value in doing, having your research agenda regardless, but adding the public engagement dimension, I think helps people better understand how research can be for the good of the community. And so I think public engagement, that it's a niche, it's a strength, it's fitting for a university that has this special obligation to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. But 10 years on, we still hear some of the same challenges as Rebecca was noting about how public engagement is recognized or not, and incentivized or not, and the different kind of workload and timelines that are associated with public engagement work. And so one of the things that really struck me about the evaluation report and the history of public engagement here at MUN is faculty members insisting that in order for public engagement to really flourish, it needs to be better valued in the promotion and tenure process. And having just come out of a faculty strike, in January and over February, and with a newly ratified collective agreement, I think there's some real opportunities to work on that in very practical ways if the will and the interest is there. And I say that because I was part of the Faculty Association negotiation team during collective bargaining. And to my knowledge, there simply hasn't been a champion for public engagement on either the employer side or the union side. I was there, I'm sure, but frankly, public engagement was not on my radar either as something to advocate for in the collective agreement, because we had a whole slew of other issues and priorities on the line to advocate for. One of which, is around precariously employed folks like myself. I'm on a teaching contract. And so we were, had our priorities to push for there. But now that the evaluation report is out, those results are useful info for those of us who are more active in the collective bargaining process. And so I think we need people to advocate for issues when the time comes out to put proposals on the table for the next round of collective bargaining. So anybody on the line, if you're a faculty member, if you've got some interest in this kind of thing, reach out to me or reach out to MUNFA so that we can have more voices that will put public engagement on the table. What people have to remember is that the language of the collective agreement can serve as a gatekeeping function, as an indication of what's valued and of what's measured, but the language can change if people care enough to change it. And I think the few other things I would just say is that, the evaluation the report points out the need to tackle public engagement in promotion and tenure processes. And so, when you actually read the collective agreement, there's things that there's actually a pretty broad definition of scholarship. So that's already kind of baked in there, right? So maybe it's more a perception of, say, like promotion and tenure committees and deans. So, promotion and tenure committees can only judge what's in the file. And if it's not in the file, it's not going to count. And so I think faculty and academic staff members need to know how to curate public engagement on their CV so that can be recognizable in categories that count. And that's things like there's greater weight that's given to things that are refereed than things that aren't refereed. There's things, published work is weighed more heavily than unpublished work. Being successful at getting external funding is weighted more than unsuccessful funding. So when you think about what a public engagement journey could look like for a faculty member, that does not necessarily line up with what is actually given weight in promotion and tenure considerations. So, I had a couple other thoughts around that, but that's kind of my main thing that really struck me from the evaluation report in terms of an actionable item to move forward on. So again, like I said, if there's folks who are interested in kind of pushing forward that public engagement conversation when it does come to things like how it gets counted for faculty members and academic staff members, I think that's really important.
Well, as we do our public engagement strategy renewal consultations this fall, hopefully some of that comes up, and maybe in another 5-10 years, we'll be reporting on the success. Thanks, Janet. Rob Nolan, as we've mentioned, you started out the process as MUN staff and now moving as an external partner. How has that affected your perspective on public engagement, both in terms of things that are working, but maybe some challenges that remain?
Yeah, so first off, my move to municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, really reinforced my belief that my belief in the importance of Memorial University to the communities. So MNL, we represent the 275 municipalities across the province. And there's not a week that goes by that we're not interacting with Memorial. And I would say through staff and our members, there's probably not a day that goes by that we're not interacting with Memorial. And that's through research capacity, work integrated learning, professional development opportunities for our municipal counselors and administrators, event partnerships, and a slew of other ways that we work together. And that's really down at the community level with the municipalities. So the university is so important there. The municipal sector in the province, like so many other sectors in the province, is stretched right now, right? Facing big intractable challenges. And we really need to be working with the only university in the province to find big solutions to these big problems. So it's more important than ever, really. Challenges that remain, well, first off, what's working? I think when Memorial and external partners work together, they do great things, right? And it's very clear that staff and faculty at the university want to make positive change. To Rebecca's point about that intrinsic motivation, it's very clear. It was clear to me when I worked at Memorial, and I think it's clear to me that the municipal sector certainly understands how much the staff and faculty at Memorial want to do good in these communities. Challenges that remain, two big things for me would be awareness and access. So again, as we mentioned earlier, people in community aren't always aware of what Memorial does, even if they're doing potentially research in those communities. Community members aren't necessarily aware that research is going on. They're also not aware of everything that Memorial offers. So talking about those big challenges that communities are facing, they might not always think to approach Memorial about XYZ problem because they might not be aware that there are researchers there or staff or facilities there that are thinking about those challenges or could be thinking about those challenges if they're brought up. And then access, Memorial can be big and bureaucratic, right? The folks on the line who work at Memorial know all about the silos that exist internally. And for an external organization, particularly nonprofits and community organizations, it can be hard to navigate that. So you mix in the fact that communities might not know of things that are available from Memorial. And then if they do know, they don't necessarily know who to go to. So it's difficult to navigate that. Those can be barriers, I think, for external organizations.
Right on. Thanks, Rob. We have a few more minutes before we're going to go to the Q&A with the audience. So folks do I see some questions lined up in the Q&A. Andrea's keeping a look at those. You can also use chat if you prefer. So I think I might just ask one more question to the gang, and I'll start with Rebecca. Is there anything that wasn't covered by the evaluation that you think needs more attention?
Yeah, That's a good one. I think that, yeah, and in fact, the thing that I'm going to bring up, I think it was alluded to in the evaluation, but wasn't directly addressed. For the first time, so I've been working in a public engagement role at Memorial for about 13 years now. And about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, pandemic times, it was the first time that I had ever heard anyone use the term self-care or work-life balance in the context of public engagement. And I didn't just hear it once, I heard it a bunch of times. So I think that, and like I said, like that, I do think that that relates to that concept of time as a barrier. The idea that we know that public engagement really does takes more time literally, but it also is a relationship-based activity. So, you know, this is work that doesn't have a timeline. It can't sometimes. And you're relying on, the two partners are relying on each other, and things change and things happen. So it's not this straightforward process. So I think that being more direct and knowing more about this stuff, these are some questions that I would have liked, or maybe probably they didn't fit. I think you're right, Peter. We couldn't ask everything for the evaluation, but I think that this is something we could look at in the future. And another thing that I think is I suspect, and we haven't done any work on this, I suspect that there are some gendered implications related to this type of work as well, that I think it would be really interesting for us to consider in the future.
Thanks, Rebecca. Rob, any thoughts on this one?
Sure. I'd love to know and love for there to be a conversation moving forward around how communities are engaging with Memorial from that direction. So how many of the projects that happen that are publicly engaged projects are initiated by community as opposed to initiated by researchers? How many projects start with a community having one of those big intractable problems, and they come to Memorial and say, is there someone who's working in this area? And that's the beginning of that relationship. I think that would be really cool moving forward to be able to track and evaluate how much of the work is started or initiated by Memorial versus how much is initiated in community because they notice a challenge and they don't know how to get through that.
Well, great thought. And I suspect, you know, as I wear my other hat with the Harris Center, there's a lot of that. And when I think of things like this Canadian Center for Fisheries Innovation at the Marine Institute, our Go Engagement partners at Grenfell campus, et cetera, I think there's a lot that come in, but I think having that receptor unit, anyway, I'm switching to panelist mode here. Jenna, your thoughts on this one?
For sure. I think what I do want to do is amplify what Rebecca was saying about there's issues around workload and public engagement timelines and the dynamics of relationship building. So just to highlight one of the researchers from the public engagement evaluation report, Max Lieberman, you know, they're constantly building relationships and need to be invited into communities. So this is like the community extending the invitation. This is kind of picks up on Rob's point as well, to extend the invitation rather than the researcher being the first one to make the move. But one invitation into the community doesn't automatically ensure that another one's going to follow. So it's this constant process of building relationship, and that takes time. And one thing for us to think about, again, as a faculty member with that faculty hat on, is how we measure productivity. You know, if you're relationship building in order to engage in public engagement, how can your productivity be measured? And especially for early career scholars, you're on a timeline, and your productivity is measured on that timeline. And if you're not delivering and publishing and whatever, you know, you're not going to be given points necessarily for relationship building. So I think that's something that really needs to be dug into a bit more, as well as the question. I think a strength of public engagement has been that it's constantly raising questions about what's a university for. What's its role in fostering engaged citizens? This is something that I'm really interested in from the teaching and learning perspective. And it's really good at breaking down silos. It's good at breaking down, sometimes it's good at breaking down that perception of the ivory tower. And I think that's more important than now more than ever in this provincial context to, you know, the future of higher education in this day and age. You know, I think public engagement and post-secondary institutions have a role in helping students find careers, sure, but also, address the global challenges that are out there, learn to be citizens, learn to be critical thinkers. And so I'd love to see kind of more depth into what public engagement role can be in those senses as well.
Right on. Thanks. Peter is the guy who did have to make sure we got the thing done. And so you can't do it all, but here's your chance to dream briefly. What do you think wasn't covered in the evaluation that does need more attention?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question. So first of all, we were quite constrained about what information we can actually get out of it. It was summative evaluation. So we wanted to get first and foremost basic answers to like questions like was it implemented, was it effective, and all similar questions. But what I'll be really interested in is knowing what specific solutions people will be willing to accept to improve levels of public engagement. So we couldn't go deep into that, and yes, but this is what I would like to see actually in some of these answers for that.
Great, thanks. Well, look, we're a little ahead of schedule to segue into our questions from the audience. And Andrea, you've been keeping track. So where would you like to start?
We do have a whole bunch of questions, and I hope we can get to them all. I'm going to start at the beginning with a question from Giovanna Lima. And the question, I think this is going to be a bit of a Rebecca question, but I think other folks might be able to hop in with their perspectives. The question is, thanks for this informative and insightful event. Considering the overlap between engagement and the core portfolios of research, education, and service, how did the creation of a separate office work for you? How did you work on developing the relationships needed to embed engagement? So Rob Greenwood, you're staying in panelist mode or in host mode and not answering this, but we'll see what Rebecca has to say.
Well, listen, maybe I'll take a first crack and we'll let Rob jump in too, because he does have some experience here. So that's an interesting question. And of course, it's never kind of a perfect or final situation. But I do think that the linkages to the other frameworks were really useful, and participating in all of those processes. I noticed there's another question related to, like having a specific office and how that is incorporated, or how that has influenced the way we've been able to operate. I think that having the framework has given us real clarity in terms of what we're trying to achieve, but it has also given the work of public engagement pan-university resonance. And so people do need to report on the public engagement work that they're doing within the administration. So I think that having that separation, the other thing is that this is the type of work that so often gets put to the side of the desk. And so I think that just the fact that we exist as an entity and that we're an academic support unit, I think that it has been necessary for us to have that separation. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, how come OPE doesn't reside within research, for example? Well, as we've said, that research element is really important, but so is teaching and learning. There are other elements of the university we overlay within so many different areas. So I think that we are there to support other work that's happening in many cases. And often the argument can be made that the work that we do and the work that we support, less so what we're doing and more so what we're helping other people do, is also contributing to the aims of these other offices. So your teaching and learning, your research, for example. Anything that you would add to that, Rob?
Just very quickly, at the outset, because we did have the 3 frameworks for each of the key core mission areas. And I think it was clear, as with the research office and the VP academic office, if you don't have a champion, a point person, yes, they're all linked. Yes, there's Venn diagrams where they all connect. But if you try to boil the ocean, you don't get anything done. And I go back to the grid we used in the document that was approved by Senate. It's on our website, from a scholar at the University of Colorado at Boulder, Stan Dietz. I always refer to it as the Dietz grid. And down one side, you had teaching and learning, research, and service, which all from a faculty member's perspective. And along the top, not engaged at all the way over to very engaged. And so we really have emphasized in our framework that it's in teaching and learning and in research that engagement happens. But there are best practices, there are specific barriers, and the framework enabled a focus on that. And we have been very, strategic planning 101, you plan your work and you work your plan. And doing evaluations like this are a key part of that. So I think we are where we are in large part because we had a separate office with a mandate to keep our eye on it. So back to you, Andrea. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I can speak now. I think what I'm going to do before we go to a question, I've got a couple sort of success stories that people have posted that I'm going to share, because I think sometimes it's nice to have a sense of what some of these projects look like and what public engagement can do. So I have one question or one comment from Ruth. I'm going to assume this is Ruth Lawrence, who says that we were involved in a project funded in winter 2020, the Erin McGowan School from the School of Human Kinetics and Recreation, and Ruth Lawrence from White Rooster Theater. Project was The Cut of It, mobilizing breast cancer research through theater and public engagement. And Ruth says she was impressed during the lockdown that we could pivot to a digital video production. That project has now been seen across North America, and the interest and response to it have been incredible. And she says, congratulations on so many worthwhile projects. So that's really quite impressive notion of what we can do. And I have another comment from Patrick Warner, more of a comment than a question. The best example of public engagement at Memorial University that I know about is the Newfoundland and Labrador Center for Applied Health Research Center's research exchange groups, now numbering more than 20. These are very close to my heart. And says it seems to be a model of efficiency and community outreach, one that could be emulated by other units. And I'll post links to both of those in the chat. And so I'm going to ask a question here that's come up in the chat from food producers. It says, as head of a group that has accepted 5 rounds of wonderful project funding from the Office of Public Engagement so far, I could speak extensively about the power and effectiveness of this funding. And there is a question. The question is, why is there such a gap in our province between knowledge and policy/practice in education, food production, health, land use, municipal policy? How do we close this gap and create a more sustainable, healthy province and population? How can the Office of Public Engagement help us move from theory and research towards action and social change? That is a very big question for very few minutes, so I'm not sure who wants to jump in there first. Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm just going to really quickly say, I'm going to go back to what Patrick said as well. We do have, OPE is only one, we're the Pan University PE unit, but there are a number of really great, really useful and focused public engagement units that look at specific areas of research and interest. So I would say, I don't know that OPE is the top stop in terms of, going from theory to policy. But I know that the Harris Center can help with that. And I know that NLCHR, when we're talking about food and municipal policy and health, they have such a broad breadth, which is a terrible phrase, of what's being covered now. It's moved well beyond straight health and into the social determinants of health. So we're seeing this kind of this kind of breadth of participation from governments, from NGOs, from et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I actually think that, OPE, we shouldn't be trying to do it all. And I do think that looking to some of these specialized units that have this PE focus as well is definitely a step to start there.
I think this is an obvious one, perhaps, for Rob to weigh in now in his role. Any thoughts on this one, Rob?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I think you're absolutely right that this is a good space for us to speak to as well. And it's a challenge, I think, for any external organization, especially as I mentioned, and as Food Producers Forum is alluding to, nonprofits, community organizations that don't necessarily have a whole lot of capacity themselves and are going to Memorial to build that capacity. M&L has done a number of, or had a number of reports completed by Harris Center and other areas at Memorial that have been excellent. And then it's the challenge of when the rubber meets the road. So we have over 100 communities at any given time in the province that are on boil water advisory. There's been lots of reports done on drinking water infrastructure for the province, but we're still coming up against this challenge of how do we solve it. And I think, Rebecca, you're absolutely right that OPE needs to not be the kind of last stop for our organizations, or Harris Center needs to not be the last stop. There needs to be an integrated approach, and that's on both the external organizations, again, to navigate the system at Memorial, but we could do with a little more help perhaps from OPE of how do we navigate the system, you know, drinking water infrastructure, what units at Memorial do we need to engage with to solve that big challenge over time? Who do we need to speak to actually, you know, again, let the rubber hit the road and find the long-term solutions for those things. So OPE, Harris Center, all the wonderful work that you do and we do with you needs to not be considered the last step, but perhaps the first step of how we engage with Memorial.
And Rob, that's a really great point. We actually, and this is a project, Andrea and one of our other PhD student employees are currently working on a project looking at Memorial's PE ecosystem and trying to better understand exactly who's out there and exactly what can be offered through all of the different PE supports within the institution. And of course, the goal is to then make that accessible as an entry point into the university. So very glad to hear that that's something that's going to be useful, and probably we should chat more about it.
And Jana or Peter, don't feel obliged to weigh in on this, but if you do want to, and before you do, if you want to, I will, of course, behoves me to mention YAFL, because it is an online tool. It's had a new technology refresh, and it exists for people to submit ideas on any topic that could be of use of teaching and learning or research. And there are a bunch of universities across the country through the Research Impact Network now, plus the University of the Arctic, that are piloting YAFL. Jenna or Peter on this one, or will we go back to Andrea? All right, Andrea.
All right, we do have a couple questions that I think everyone can pop in on a little bit. One of them is, everyone sort of touched on this a bit in terms of your bios and your introductions, but the question is, how did you, if at all, incorporate engagement in career progression? And so I think some of that might feel obvious, but maybe if any of you have particular projects or particular positions that really boosted you or got you excited about making that part of your career.
I think this is a superb panel for that question. I just don't know where to begin. It's so rich. So maybe I'll go to Jana first.
That's a really great question. And I think I would fall into the category of someone who's motivated, you know, wanting to do good. It doesn't really count in what I'm doing, the where I am in my position at the university. There isn't any career progression, actually. And, you know, we're trying to advocate for more pathways for that, for sure. But when I started out in 2011 with the public engagement conversations, they were very informative. They were very formative in how I understood my own work and in helping to frame what I do. And so I was picking up signals at the time of what the university, you know, valued, how I could approach my own teaching. And so there were some early signals in terms of how to include engagement in the curriculum. So I took a few more risks and gambles and stuff. I was, you know, learning how to be a university instructor. But with the public engagement conversations happening around me, I thought, okay, well, this can count. So, that's like permission to be able to go out and bring in people from the community and to try to, you know, dig more deeply into things like experiential education and whatever. And so building the sense that education isn't just about credentialing, but it's about building citizens as well, and citizens as lifelong learners. And so I've had my own fits and starts of trying to embed public engagement in the curriculum throughout there. Definitely being involved in these circles has helped connect me. Like I said, I'm a big picture thinker, so I like having these pan-university conversations. In terms of career progression, though, like I said, it's in situations that I'm in, it's not formally measured in any way at all. But I hope to be able to help to work so that it can be for more people. and for more people on various pathways throughout the university.
Super, Jana. And Peter, I think we met you first as a MASP student intern. Your thought on this question?
We have limited time and I got very little value to add, so I'll skip this. I'll wait for the next question.
Well, I just know your work on public engagement has helped us a lot, and I suspect.
Well, that's true, obviously, yes, and it helped me as well because it was actually tied in my future career as well. So it was mutually beneficial on both sides. So absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That's what I was fishing for. Rob, I bet you have an answer to this one too.
Yeah, I would say mutually beneficial as well. My time as a staff member at Memorial University, I kind of tried to squeeze as much juice out of it public engagement wise as I could. So I was chair of Happy City St. John's, a local nonprofit, for a period of time. And while I was there, we engaged with Office of Public Engagement and Harris Center, got a number of quick start grants. And during that time, I was also staff. So I was able to kind of navigate that ecosystem at the university that we were talking about being challenging to navigate, and make connections that were related to that work. Partnered with MNL on a couple of those projects, and now I'm CEO at MNL. So all of that really helped, and it made me, a proud staff member of Memorial as well, because community engagement, public engagement became part of my own professional identity. Back to that intrinsic motivation piece. So while sometimes I'm sure there's staff members on the line, sometimes it can feel like your day-to-day can be dry and repetitive in a big institution. You can, liven things up and really feel proud of your work if you engage with the community while you're doing your work. So it's a source of pride and certainly intrinsic motivation for me.
Thanks, Rob. I'm dying to hear what Rebecca says on this one.
I'm not going to go on and on, but I'm going to just kind of echo what Rob just said. I came to the university, I did my master's, realized that the thing that I found most exciting about academic work was finding the big connections. The idea of the narrowing of my focus didn't appeal. I left, I joined the dark side. I worked in advertising for a while. And honestly, that's a fun job, but I knew that I wanted to do something that had more of that sort of societal contribution. And as soon as I saw the position at the Harris Center, I realized this is a way to give back and to work with smart, interesting people who care about what they're doing. And that's kind of exactly what I want out of a career. And I never expected to focus on public engagement, but I'm just so pleased that I've gotten to work here and do this work that's responsive to real life and stuff that people need. So it's fun and exciting stuff.
You didn't go on and on, but that was a very rich answer. Thank you. Andrea, other questions we want to address? We still have 5 or 6 minutes.
We do have another couple questions. One of them goes back to the performing the evaluation and the data. And I know Peter and Rebecca have both mentioned, you can only do so much when you don't have data from the very beginning. So the question is, what would the baseline data prior to implementing the framework, what would you have hoped for if you could go back in time? What would your wish list of things you could know be?
Rob was on the committee. Rob, any quick thoughts on that one?
Oh, baseline data before we got started. I think an understanding of public engagement at Memorial, because that was kind of the challenge that we kept coming up against, of how reliable was the evaluation in terms of people's opinion or perception of the change in public engagement from start to finish. So we believe, and it seems as though there's been kind of a robust or substantive improvement, but it would have been ideal to know really where public engagement stood at Memorial and what people's perception of it was at the time.
Right. Likewise, Jana, you were very engaged. I'm going to get to Rebecca and Peter too. Jana?
I don't know. I had some notes here about we treasure what we measure what we treasure, but sometimes we just struggle simply to name what matters. And that's some, an example is like, you can talk about watersheds, but we talk about air sheds, but they're all very important. So just kind of coming up with concepts of what we want to measure in the first place. Maybe having some kind of baseline for what a public engagement focused CV might look like for folks, and how that's changed. I think I've kind of gotten really focused on that measurement side from having spent so much time with all the engineers around here. It really is about, measuring those kinds of things.
Study of CVs could be a proxy. I can see serious ethics approvals needed, but Peter, any quick ones on this? And then I'll let Rebecca finish.
Yes, absolutely. So coming from the evaluation, I mean, we're looking at analytical data, and as we did with this evaluation, we ideally would like to have information about the pan-university edge assessments, like of the public engagement, because then we don't have to rely on like people's memory or like people's perception of changes, but we can actually have hard data, and actually we can make some strong claims about what specifically happened during a specific period of time when we have these two data points. We didn't have it, so we had like a lot of indicators that suggest that this actually happens, and actually quite a lot actually. And to actually dismiss all these claims, not only from quantitative data, but from a number of key informants interviews and from a lot of people coming in qualitative, it's obviously you'll be silly, right? But still, if we could have this analytical data, those hard numbers, obviously I'll feel even better. But yeah, but that's what it is.
And Rebecca, you're going to get the last word. I'm actually going to get the last word, but you'll get the penultimate word.
So listen, there's one thing in this evaluation that I do feel that wasn't strongly enough focused on, and that is students. And we did student focus groups. We did not think that using our survey method with students was going to be particularly effective. Students are not here for anything like the time period that many staff and faculty are. So I would have loved if we had more of a sense of where things have been for students. And I think moving forward, we need to consider what we do regularly to ensure that we understand the landscape for student public engagement.
Yeah, and that for sure will be a key focus for us, as Rebecca said, for the new strategy. And all the input we've had in this session and the chat will inform our thinking about the next strategy, our planning to plan, which we're heavy into now. And we'll break out of the gates in September and get going on all that in earnest. I just, in cluing up, circle back to some of the discussion on impact on policy and in practice. And one of the keys, I think, is also what we see on this panel, and I think in all the participants in this session, is developing a community of practice. And we're seeing people like Peter and people like Rob, who are looking at this work as staff, students, faculty as well in the university, who then go into governments or industry or NGOs, or even just as citizens, not just as citizens, especially as citizens. And so, there's been work on tech transfer, lots of work on tech transfer. And one of the founders of BlackBerry talked about the biggest form of tech transfer is on graduation day, when all those humans go out and get jobs and take what they've learned and apply it. And I think with that flow of people from the university and out, and from out and into the university, and through exchanges like this, we try to be the bridge. We create a community of practice, we influence the culture, and I am certain that Peter and Rob and others, as they move up the chain, and Rob is now CEO of MNL, will be evidence informed, will be looking at engagement opportunities to shape policy and practice. And we know there's people in the provincial government, federal government, as well as municipal, indigenous. It's happening. So we're confident based on the evaluation and the next round of the strategy. I'm going to stop talking now, but we really are into this, and we think it makes a difference. So all my thanks to the panel for an amazing job, Rebecca and the team on the evaluation. Thanks all to you for attending. We would really love if you fill out the session survey that Andrea has just posted to the chat, sticking with our ongoing commitment to evaluation. Thanks to Andrea for a great job opening this up and helping with the Q&A. If you want to watch any parts of this session again or share more broadly, you'll be able to, after we stop recording, it'll be on the YouTube channel. And it's a real pleasure. Lots more great stuff to come. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.